And I think I'll read a poem. This is actually, as I mentioned, the 4th anniversary of my mother's passing, so it's kind of fitting that I get to read poems about her today. Hope you like them. And I'll just read this little poem called Anniversary Poem, which is in the new issue of Mezzo Carmine, the wonderful journal that
Kim does, yeah.
I'm sorry? That Kim does, yeah, Kim Bridgeford.
Yeah.
And it's called Anniversary Poem. 4 years gone, and each return I feel you far from me. Lying flat in your boat, you drift and float beyond where I can see. When will I ever learn, keeping you company, and my childish heart with my childish art won't bring you back to me? The seasons tack and turn, the snow beats and the sun burns, and I, your reckless daughter, watch you who feared all water, sail bravely out to sea. I think I'll switch gears and read some slightly more cheerful poems. From this book, Saint Sinatra. How many have I done? I've lost track of how many.
That's okay, fine.
Very bad at that. I have several of my students in the room from Fordham, and they will attest to the fact that I lose track of time.
Well, so do we. It's a nice thing about this.
You're at 17 minutes and 19 seconds.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad somebody's out.
This little book, Saint Sinatra, is part of a project that is kind of ongoing. As an Italian-American, of course, you're helplessly Catholic. But you're not Catholic in any normal way. You know, the Irish go to church, and, you know, we were not very observant. We were not very pious. You went on major feast days of the year and such, but religion, your whole life is shot through with religion, especially anything having to do with food. That's really the sacramental element of life, and family, and love in the weird and wild ways in which it shows up. But the most important thing to us, I think, growing up were the saints, because Jesus was important, of course, and God, and Mary. But it was really St. Anthony who was responsible for most things that go on in the world. And so we had this weird little cult of saints that you would call on. And so that's sort of very deep in me. And it got me to thinking a few years ago, you know, goodness is so important in being a saint. But I thought, what about beauty? You know, what about beauty? This is really the way in which most of us feel some sort of contact with what lies beyond us. Pope John Paul says in his letter to artists that goodness is beauty is the instantiation of goodness in the world, and artists, of course, their vocation is beauty. So, this is a book that's dedicated to some real saints, but also some rogue saints who are practitioners of beauty, and like most of them are artists of various kinds. So I'll read some of those. I also like to use these poems to sort of interrogate the tradition that I've inherited. And so the first poem is, or one of the first poems of the book is about Eve, because I think that Eve ought to be a saint. And this poem is called Saint Eve in Exile. She put up with a lot.
Yeah.
Saint Eve in Exile. This is a dramatic monologue, obviously. Here, amid a field of light, you say my name. And I am not she, the girl you called your own. My mouth, a cavern. My chest, an empty cave. I am dry and dusty. I am not wet or well. Not the riverbed of love you shaped me to be. Wide as a delta, deep as any mine full of diamonds. Not this common coal, my birthstone, my rock of heavy longing. I am black with it where you would have me white. Ever a disappointment, I grew breasts where you shaped me straight and smooth. Spoke when you asked for a song. Agreed where you hoped I would exceed. Climb out of the hole you dug for me. Place where you planted me in the dark, among creatures who never knew my name. You cut me in two. I take half the blame. Speaking of losing people, we lost, of course, the great voice of Seamus Heaney back in the end of August. A great source of grief and sadness for all of us. And Heaney is one of those voices, even though I'm not Irish, I like to pretend to be Irish whenever possible, because they have such a great poetic tradition, and so much of my own...
Don't tell them that.
Don't, oh, I know, they're so full of themselves, trust me, I know. But, you know, whenever I go to Ireland, I feel at home there, while everybody's looking at this hair and this nose, you know, and they're saying, well, I don't think so. But Heaney really...
Come on, dark hair, light eyes, you fit right in.
No, they don't seem to think so. But Seamus Heaney has been one of those voices for me that is one in the echo chamber that we all have in our heads. So this poem I wrote a couple of years ago, and he's a saint, of course. I called it. He is now, really, but at the time he wasn't. He was on his way. It's called Saint Seamus. It's a sonnet, and it takes it's an epigraph from his beautiful poem Personal Helicon, in which he says, "I rhyme to see myself, to set the darkness echoing. For years I've knelt at your holy wells and envied the cut of your clean-edged song, lain down in the bog where dead men dwell, grieved with your ghosts as they told of their wrongs. Your consonants cleave my soft palate. I taste their music and savor it long past the last line of the taut sonnet, its rhyming subtle, its accent strong. And every poem speaks a sacrament, blood of old blessing and bread of the word, feeding me full in language ancient as Aaron's rock and St. Kevin's birds. English will never be the same. To make it ours is why you came." I stole those last lines from Robert Frost, I confess. I also would like to read another sort of rogue saint, in part because it's a 16-line sonnet, which we don't hear that often. I've always thought that Lazarus put up with a lot as well, you know. He dies, he comes back to life, he dies again, and he's a very good sport about all of it. So this is a poem that's called Saint Lazarus, and it's kind of, it actually comes out of Ignatian tradition in trying to imagine yourself in the place of particular famous characters from the Bible or from history. Ted Hughes, that very un-Catholic poet, Ted Hughes once said that St. Ignatius' spiritual exercises were like gymnastics for the imagination, and they truly are. So this little poem is called Saint Lazarus. He knit himself up, a cable stitch of skin, pushed his left eye in his sock, and then his right, cracked the knuckles in his fingers, now so thin, raised himself from the dirt and stood upright. "Lazarus, Lazarus, don't get dizzy. Lazarus, Lazarus, now get busy. Mary's weeping, Martha's made a cake, Jesus is calling at the graveyard gate. Your closest cousin, happy you are dead, eyes Martha's sheep and Mary's empty bed." The chorus of voices sings him awake. Once a body's broken, it cannot break. He licks his lips and wags his muscled tongue, flexes each foot till the warm blood comes, turns from the darkness and moves towards the sun. A step, a shamble, a dead-out run.
Huh.